the oldest physical decoys we've found don't come from sporting catalogs. They came from wetlands buried in mud, peat, and silt where organic matter materials survived. Some of the earliest confirmed examples include Northern Europe. Hunters carved simple bird forms from wood and anchored them in shallow water. They weren't detailed sculptures. They weren't smooth, oval shaped with slight necks. Some had holes drilled through them for line or anchor cord. What's important is where they were found, near ancient shoreline hunting sites. It's in clusters, not by themselves. Positioned in likely landing zones. That tells us they weren't art, they were tools. Decoys feel modern because we buy them in boxes. But the idea behind a decoy, putting something in the water to influence a bird's decision, is ancient, older than firearms, older than bows, older than most civilizations. And the more archaeologists learn, the clearer it becomes that decoys weren't an accident. They were one of the first examples of humans understanding animal physiology well enough to control behavior. Early decoys lacked detail for a reason. They were viewed from above, from altitude ducks see. Shape, contrast, spacing, position relative to wind and water. They don't see feather detail. They don't understand. That understanding came from observation, not theory. Indigenous North American people, pre-contact. This might be the most important chapter. Long before Europeans arrived, indigenous hunters across North America, Native Americans, they used hollowed gourds, carved wooden birds, feathered covered frames. Some of the most famous examples from the Atlantic coast where hunters used wooden ducks and goose decoys that predated European contact by centuries. These weren't decorations, they were tools. There's tool marks where show wear from anchor lines and repeated use. That proves that they were tools. Back in ancient Egypt, 2500 BCE, Egyptian tomb art shows floating bird shapes placed near nets and traps. Some decoys were carved from wood, others were likely made from bundled reeds that floated naturally. They weren't meant to be retrieved. They were meant to hold birds in places long enough for the nets to be triggered. This is decoy usage integrated into a system, not a standalone tactic. Live decoys, the ultimate confidence trick. In several cultures, live decoys were used. Captured birds were tethered lightly near traps or ambush points. Their calls and movements provided realism no carving could match. This method was common in parts of Asia, the Mediterranean, and way back when the indigenous Native American culture. The ethics weren't debated because survival was the priority. What mattered is the insight. Humans realized that behavior mattered more than appearance back then. Anchoring, spacing, and movement. Early decoys weren't static. Some were allowed to drift naturally, others were slightly anchored, so they shifted with the wind and current. Spacing mattered. Decoys were not tightly packed unless birds naturally loafed that way. This wasn't instincts, it was trial and error over generations. The transition from tool to art. For thousands of years, decoys were ugly, but effective. The shift towards it being art didn't begin until leisure hunting increased, commercial carving emerged, decoys became trade goods. That transition comes much later, and it's important to make clear. Early decoys were never about beauty, they were about decision making. Live decoys, the ultimate confidence trick. In several cultures, live decoys were used. Captured birds were tethered lightly near traps or ambush points. Their calls and movements provided realism no carving could match. What modern hunters miss. The deeper lesson here isn't about decoys. It's about restraint. Early hunters didn't add more when birds flared. They moved the setup. They waited for better conditions. They adjust the environment, not the equipment. Every decoy you own, plastic or cork, traces back to someone standing in a marsh thousands of years ago, realizing something simple. If birds see others below them, they feel safer. That moment changed hunting forever. Next time you hear someone argue about paint schemes or head position, remember this. The first decoy didn't even have a head. And they worked. Next episode, we will talk about how the entire civilization, like ancient Egypt, built hunting systems around wetlands and birds.